Well, I don't think you're going to be telling your grandkids about Notre Dame's win over Central Michigan on Saturday, but nonetheless, the Irish took care of business by pulling away in the second half and winning by a final score of 41-17. It wasn't the prettiest 24-point victory, but at least now it's officially Ohio State week.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Monday, September 18th. So thank you for getting your week started here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And this episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Obviously, it's Ohio State week, and we're all jacked up and ready for that one on Saturday. But as Marcus Freeman likes to say, we've got to stay in the moment. So first, I'm going to go over everything that transpired on the field between Notre Dame and Central Michigan this past Saturday. And then we'll get into what it means for the Ohio State game. And I'll cut right to the point. The Irish did win 41-17, but as you know from watching that game, the final score is not an adequate reflection of Notre Dame's overall performance. Whether Marcus Freeman or any of the players are going to admit it or not, it really looked like Notre Dame had overlooked Central Michigan a little bit, and they were looking ahead to Ohio State. And that's totally fine, okay? How could you not if you were the players, if you're the coaches? You know you're going to win against Central Michigan, and you're already thinking about what is potentially one of the biggest games at Notre Dame Stadium in the past 2 decades. Certainly in my lifetime, I think this is going to be up there with one of the most important games for the Notre Dame football program and in that stadium. So when that's on the horizon, I don't blame anyone for looking ahead a little bit, because we as fans were all looking ahead. So I'm not shocked that a little bit of that crept into the minds of the players. And another thing about this is it's not like Notre Dame came out of the gate looking sluggish. As a matter of fact, the first couple drives went according to plan. The defense forced a 3-and-out on the opening drive of the game, and then the offense got the ball right around their own 10-yard line. It wasn't the best punt return in the world by Chris Tyree. And then they went 90 yards in under 2 minutes after Sam Hartman connected with Tobias Merriweather down the sideline for an absolutely beautiful 75-yard touchdown pass. That pass from Hartman was like chef's kiss right there, man. He put the ball right on Tobias' number. I have no idea what the hell that Central Michigan cornerback was doing on that play, but nonetheless, happy to see Tobias Merriweather get on the board, and that was a big touchdown for him, and the first of a few big touchdown passes by Sam Hartman. But in that moment, seeing Tobias Merriweather race down the sideline untouched for a touchdown, I was like, this is awesome. I was in great spirits. That is exactly the way that I wanted to see, or exactly the way that I wanted Notre Dame to start that game. And I figured, all right, if this goes how I think it's going to go, Sam Hartman is going to be out of the game by halftime. But maybe after that incredible start, Notre Dame started to get a little bit complacent in that moment as well, because on the ensuing possession, Central Michigan went 65 yards on 6 plays to score a touchdown and tie the game. It wasn't the best drive for the Notre Dame defense. But then Notre Dame got the ball back, and they responded with an 11-play, 75-yard touchdown drive that resulted in a 17-yard touchdown run by Audric Estimé on 4th and 1. So then the Irish go up another score, and you're like, okay, that first drive, second drive for Central Michigan, first scoring drive was a fluke. Let's get back to the program. So then Notre Dame gets the ball back at the start of the second quarter, and Hartman connected on another beautiful deep touchdown pass, this one to Chris Tyree. Great catch by Chris Tyree as well. I know he was wide open, and it looked perfect, but catching a ball like that when it's going over your head and hitting your outstretched arms, it's not that easy. So Tyree scores, Notre Dame's up 21-7, and you're thinking, all right, we can kick back and relax a little bit here. This one is going to be a blowout. Notre Dame should be up. They should be able to add a couple more touchdowns before the half. Sam Hartman's going to be out. So that's how I'm feeling watching this game. The game feels all but wrapped up, and then we'd all spend the second half thinking about how Steve Angeli looked. But that's really when everything went flat. Like, Notre Dame goes up 21-7, and the rest of that second quarter was just a drag. Notre Dame did not look very good. It was not a very inspiring performance on either side of the ball, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make here. It's not that Notre Dame came out and looked terrible from the start. They had really good moments, and then it felt like when they had those good moments, and it was clear, like a reminder that, oh yeah, they're going to kill this team, then they would just chill out and then kind of allow Central Michigan to hang around, even though nobody ever thought that Central Michigan was going to win that game. And whenever they let up that cushion, it felt like Central Michigan was pretty opportunistic and took advantage of it. And it is worth pointing out that Notre Dame was not at full strength in this one. J.D. Bertrand was out in concussion protocol. We already knew that going into the game, although Pete Sampson of The Athletic reported that Bertrand probably could have played on Saturday, but they opted to rest him ahead of Ohio State, which we all totally understand and would agree with that decision, I would imagine. DJ Brown, safety, also out with a hamstring issue, even though he wasn't ruled out by the Notre Dame PR department before the game. I think he was like a game-time decision. He didn't play much at all in this one. Mitchell Evans, surprise scratch. Gabe Rubio, also out with a knee injury that he's been dealing with for the past few weeks. But also, we got to be fair to Central Michigan. They were without their starting quarterback, Burt Manuel Jr., so they were playing with their backup quarterback and still were able to move the ball a little bit on offense. So when you consider all the injuries that Notre Dame was dealing with and the circumstances going into the game, it's not particularly shocking that Notre Dame would let up a bit in this game. But obviously, we don't want that as fans, and the coaching staff doesn't want that either. We expect Notre Dame to play at a high level each and every game because we know how much talent is on the roster. We've seen them do it multiple times this season already, and that's just way more fun to watch as a fan. Like, watching Notre Dame dominate Navy for 60 straight minutes was a lot more fun than watching Notre Dame beat Central Michigan by 24 points because there were some lapses. But it's not almost. It is unfair to expect even the really good college football teams to dominate week in and week out for the entire length of the game. It happens to every team where they just have a little bit of a letdown game against a far inferior opponent, one that the game is probably never really in jeopardy. But when you look at the final score, like, kind of what happened there? And that's not even really the case here, because when you look at the final score of this one, it's like, oh, Notre Dame, this was never in doubt. But we know that Notre Dame didn't look that great. But let's look at some of how the other top teams played on Saturday, because Notre Dame wasn't alone in this. Number 2 Michigan went to halftime up 14-6 on Bowling Green. They ended up winning 31-6, but still, that's not a great start. It was far from perfect for the Wolverines, and they were probably, going into the week, you'd think one of the most trustworthy teams in college football right now, but they had a really slow start to that game as well. Number 3, Florida State. They went up 31-10 on Boston College, but then nearly blew it, and they escaped with a 31-29 win. And this Boston College team needed a rain delay last week to beat Holy Cross, and not the Holy Cross across the street from Notre Dame. I don't think they have a football team, last I checked. The Holy Cross in Massachusetts. So Boston College, not a very good team. Florida State, we all thought were really good, and they struggled in that one as well. Let's look at the 4th-ranked team in the country at the time, Texas. They were in a dogfight with Wyoming, and I'll point out that Wyoming is not some scrub. They did beat Texas Tech in their season opener, and I think Texas Tech and what Joey McGuire is building over there is pretty solid, but still, it's Wyoming, and that game was actually tied at 10 going into the 4th quarter. Then the Longhorns scored 21 unanswered points. They win going away. Number 7, Penn State. They struggled to get much going against an Illinois team that scraped by Toledo in week 1, which... been there, brother. But they also got housed by Kansas the following week. So Penn State did win by 17, but if you watch that game, you know it wasn't really pretty. It was not a great game for Drew Aller, and it just was tough to get anything going for the Nittany Lions. So not a great win for them either. I could keep going here. I could bring up the fact that Alabama, who was the 10th-ranked team in the country at the time, beat USF 17-3. But honestly, that might not really support my argument here because they might just stink. Like, they looked terrible, man. Tyler Buckner... I'm sorry, man. I was wrong about you. I'll get into what predictions I was right and wrong on about this game in segment 3, but boy, was I wrong about Tyler Buckner, man. It was like watching a funeral for his playing career. It was really depressing because I like him. I have no reason not to, but he literally looked like he had never played football in that game against USF in his first start and probably only start for Alabama. So I don't know. If it makes you feel any better, Tyler, you actually might have had the best day of any former Notre Dame quarterback because Phil Dracovic and Drew Pine were somehow worse than what Tyler Buckner put up on Saturday. But let's get back to my main point. Notre Dame clearly did not play up to their full potential in this one. But am I supposed to believe that the team that boat raced Navy from start to finish and the team that completely shut down NC State in the second half is just gone because they looked a little sluggish at times against Central Michigan, and that's somehow going to carry over into the Ohio State game more than any of the other previous games? I just don't see it that way because I don't think that's how it works. And I'm not going to try and sell you on the idea that, oh, this is the best thing that could have happened to Notre Dame, because I don't really believe that's true either. Like, I just think it happens in college football, and it happened to Notre Dame on Saturday. the coaching staff does have a lot of things that they can point out and address in meetings and in practice this week. That much is clear. I'll give you that if you think this is actually a good thing for Notre Dame that they didn't play that well. And maybe it was a wake-up call for some of the players and they realized they need to be way more focused this week, but I just think that would have happened anyway because it's the Ohio State game. Now at least it's on film so you can point to and be like, you cannot do this against Ohio State. You might have done it in practice. You did it in the game now. That can't happen. Maybe that carries over into the game, but I just look at this as an ugly game. In every season, you're going to have a few of these ugly games, even the really good teams where you're just like, wow, that was weird, but then you move on. If this were last year's team, Notre Dame maybe could have lost that game, or at least it's going down to the fourth quarter. But Notre Dame is a good enough team where even when they don't play nearly close to their best, they're still able to dominate in the second half or when they need to and get away with a big win. And that's exactly what happened here because Notre Dame still did bring in their backups at the end of the game. Like it wasn't all bad in this one, and they showed some really good signs. And I understand that you develop week to week in college football, but development is rarely a straight line. There's peaks and valleys along the way. And if you look back on it, Notre Dame did not look like a team that was going to dominate Clemson last year after the win against Syracuse. As a matter of fact, you want to point to a specific player. Benjamin Morrison looked terrible in that game against Syracuse. And then against Clemson, he looked like one of the best defensive backs in the country. So it can kind of go all over the place. I could also bring up the fact that in 2018, Notre Dame looked unstoppable after beating 12th-ranked Syracuse 36-3, and then they had one more game left against USC to clinch a spot in the playoff, and that USC team went 5-7 that year, and Notre Dame had to scrape by in that one when there was way more at stake in that game. But then, there's the 2020 game when Notre Dame dominated Pittsburgh, and then they ended up beating Clemson. So I just think that I could point to different games to sort of support my argument when in reality, teams sort of fluctuate week to week, and Notre Dame looked really good at points on Saturday. There were points that were not so good, but we have seen plenty of good things during these first four games to lead us to believe that Notre Dame can not only play at a really high level, they can do it when they need to, and now it's on everyone from the coaching staff down to the last player on the roster to be able to peak on Saturday because they're going to need it to beat Ohio State. So coming up next, let's get into the specifics a little bit. Let's go over what Notre Dame did really well and where they failed against the Chippewas. This episode is brought to you by Betterhelp. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing right before bed or at other inopportune moments? As it turns out, one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy gives you a place to do that so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. Before we get back to the game, this is a reminder to please like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast and you like what you hear, I'd greatly appreciate it if you rated the show 5 stars, left a review, and of course, subscribed. Okay, let's go over some of the positives from this game. And I think you got to start with the play of Sam Hartman, but specifically his deep ball. We obviously knew that Sam Hartman was a great deep ball thrower at Wake Forest. We had all seen the highlights. We had seen the stats. We had talked about it all off season about what he did. And now we're starting to see him do it in the blue and gold on Saturdays. Notre Dame had not really had that many explosive passing plays like this from Sam Hartman where he's just really just cocking it back and letting it rip downfield. And then he converts with Tobias Merriweather for that 75-yard touchdown that I talked about in the open, and that was just a perfectly placed ball by Hartman. And then he followed that up in the second quarter with a 76-yard touchdown pass to Chris Tyree, the converted running back, now wide receiver. I already complimented his catch on that play. It was just an unbelievable pass by Sam Hartman again, and it was really encouraging to see Notre Dame push the ball down the field because in the preview, I had talked a lot about how Central Michigan's defensive backs are really bad, and Notre Dame challenged them early and often, and for the most part, it worked out really well. I also thought Hartman's pass to Rico Flores right after he got hurt, more on that in a bit, but once he came back in the game and he threw that fade route to Rico Flores where he just sort of dropped it in the bucket, that throw might have been even more impressive than the ones to Chris Tyree and Tobias Merriweather because at least on that pass to Rico Flores, there was a defender draped all over him, but he just put it right where he needed to, where Flores could catch it near the sideline. It was an absolutely perfect pass and a good catch by Rico Flores as well. He had a 39-yard pass to Jaden Thomas that honestly could and should have been a touchdown, but give credit to Jaden Thomas for still making a great dive and catch on the play. But you could even see on the broadcast, Sam Hartman immediately looks over to the sideline and kind of taps his chest and goes, on me. Like, he knew that should have been a touchdown, but it wasn't because he underthrew it a little bit. But we're getting a little nitpicky now. When you consider all the other great throws he made during the game, I think we can let that one slide. So Hartman ended up finishing with 330 passing yards, and 232 of them came on 4 plays. Some people might not love that. They might. Clearly Sam Hartman missed some throws, especially once he came back from that injury. He let 2 sail over the head of Jaden Greathouse. He also missed a couple on third downs that I'm sure he'd like to have back. So it was a far from perfect game from Sam Hartman, but when it came to throwing the deep ball in this one, he was on point from the beginning through the end, and it's really encouraging because Notre Dame is obviously going to need some big explosive plays to beat Ohio State because they're a really good defense. But we also got to give some credit to Audric Estimé because that dude is a horse running the ball. He finished with 20 carries, 176 yards and a touchdown. He should have had another 72-yard touchdown, but that was called back. Again, more on that in a little bit. Just a quick aside, Jared Parker, please run more sweeps to Audric Estimé because that looked unstoppable when he had the ability to get the outside and read the pulling guards or whoever was pulling in front of him, making blocks on the outside. He'd always hit the hole, and he'd get some on that. And on that third down play that was called back, it was a perfectly executed sweep play outside of the holding penalty, obviously. But I really liked that Notre Dame was implementing that into the game because it was working really well in this one. Estimé finished with 8.8 yards per carry, and he was running through dudes. He was running around them, and he was even running over them, including 2 hurdles on 2 consecutive plays. That was crazy. If you're a defensive back at this point, like, what do you even do trying to stop Audric Estimé? Because if you go high and you're like, all right, let's try to meet him with physicality, he's going to crush you. He's literally going to run through you, and you will regret that decision and maybe regret ever deciding to play football in the first place because he's that big and he's that powerful. And if you go low and try to take out his legs, apparently he can just jump over you in stride and keep going. I mean, if he's got that in his bag too, we're really talking about one of the best running backs in college football. Like, I already knew he was really good, but on Saturday, when Notre Dame was just feeding him the ball at the end of the game, I was like, man, this dude is just different. And it's kind of crazy thinking back to how things could have gone differently if Notre Dame had ended up getting Will Shipley. Is Audric Estimé even on the roster? Who knows? Maybe that's an offseason podcast. But still, I know that there's some people who are like a little bit concerned about his workload. I'm just really not. He only got 20 carries in this one. He's on pace to finish the season with 189 carries. That number will likely go up a little bit because I imagine he's going to get the ball a little bit more, especially in this 4-game stretch when Notre Dame has Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and then USC. But he's not even on track to carry 200 times this season. And going into this year, we all thought he would get like at least 200. So I'm really not that concerned about it right now. Would it have been nice if Notre Dame could have like benched him after the first half and given all the other backs some carries? Yeah, but now he's also really hot right now. And it's probably like, just get me to Ohio State. I'm ready to run through them as well. I also thought it was a pretty good bounce-back game for the Notre Dame wide receivers. It wasn't like one guy went off in this one. Hartman continues to distribute the ball all around the field. Chris Tyree had 2 catches. Tobias Merriweather had 2 catches. Jane Thomas led the team with 4 catches with 63 yards. Rico Flores added 3 catches, and then Jaden Greathouse had 2. So we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. Does Notre Dame need a true wide receiver 1? I would say up to this point, no one has really stepped up to be that number 1 guy. Jane Thomas does seem to be the most consistent, but maybe this is the game that gets Tobias Merriweather going. Tobias Merriweather had 3. For whatever reason, whenever I look at the box score, they attributed 1 catch to Cam Hart. So my bad on that one. Tobias Merriweather had 3. But my point is that Tobias Merriweather could build off this game, and hopefully that'll help going up against Ohio State in the rest of the season. Defensively, I thought Javonte Jean-Baptiste had an excellent game. He had 3 pressures and was very effective at stopping the run. That was part of the reason why he came over to Notre Dame, so he would not just be like a pass rusher. He would get some reps stopping the run as well and hopefully improve his NFL draft stock because you got to be able to do both at that level. He got 34 snaps to Nana Osafo-Mensah's 25. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see that gap between the two increase week to week. I just think that the way that Javonte Jean-Baptiste is playing is just exceptional. He also had a great game against NC State, so that's really encouraging to see on the defensive line. Thomas Harper, another great game by him. He is very good as a blitzer. He had 2 pressures, including arguably one of the plays of the game. Actually, it's not even arguable. You can make the case that maybe it was the play of the game defensively with his sack fumble. That was awesome, dude. Like, I know that in modern football, they're trying to get rid of like the extremely violent hits, but sometimes It's going to be a violent game, and that was a clean hit by Thomas Harper. No targeting, no nothing. He had a clean shot at the quarterback, and boy, did he take advantage of that one. I literally jumped off my couch when he made that play, and you could hear it on the broadcast. It's maybe the single good thing about the Peacock broadcast was the gnat sound from his hit on that play. That was awesome, and he just had another really good game. He even mentioned in a press conference, I don't know if it was after the game or just sometime last week, that he didn't really get to blitz a ton at Oklahoma State. Notre Dame is allowing him to blitz a little bit more. He likes it a lot, and we're starting to see why, because he's pretty damn good at it. Overall, I thought the secondary put in a pretty quality performance. They did give up some chunk plays, but they did help hold Central Michigan to 3 of 13 on third downs and only 137 pass yards. Yes, they were using their backup quarterback. Yes, that guy was not very good, but still, I thought it was a pretty good day for the Notre Dame secondary. Spencer Schrader converted on another 50-yard field goal, and although he missed a 59-yarder, I don't think anyone is going to blame him for that. At first, I thought it was good. From the view on the broadcast, I actually thought that did have the distance. It was a little short. Oh, well. I know some people were a little bit upset with the coaching staff for even attempting it, but come on. It's a Central Michigan game. It's not like a key possession against Ohio State. I think they were just trying to see if he could do it so that maybe later in the year, if they need a game-winning field goal, they know that he can make it from that distance in a game. But still, it was kind of like fun. Like, wow, they're really trying this. And, I thought that was a good kick. So those were definite positives in this one. And coming up in segment 3, I'm going to go over the negatives, talk about what Notre Dame can clean up, and then I'll actually grade myself in this one and how my predictions fared in this game that's coming up. College football season is here, and this season, the Locked On Podcast Network is kicking up our coverage with a new show called College Football Kickoff Live, which airs every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover everything going on in the sport and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of hosts covering their team every day. Now it's time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Sam Hartman has done for the Notre Dame football program, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're full of flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer. Exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Okay, let's go over some of the negatives from this one and the things that Notre Dame needs to get cleaned up. And the first thing for me, they got to clean up the penalties. That was one thing that did carry over from the NC State game from last week, and that has to stop, right now. Yes, I'm sure if we analyzed every single call, I'm sure we could make some arguments that some of them shouldn't have been called or Notre Dame got a bad break there. But the point remains that Notre Dame finished with 8 penalties for 72 yards, and they actually had a 9th penalty, a holding on third down that Central Michigan declined. And some of these were really bad. Like the holding penalty on Holden Stays during Estimé's touchdown run was probably the most damaging, considering it was a touchdown that was called back, and it was an obvious holding. I actually saw some people dispute that. That's insane. It was clearly a holding, and I saw right away, I was like, yep, hold, flag comes in, touchdown negated. Riley Mills' roughing the passer penalty was definitely something that could have been avoided. Same with Josh Burnham's. I didn't like Jaden Mickey's pass interference in the end zone, but it is what it is. Plus, Junior Tuialamaka's offsides. All of these have got to be cleaned up because it's not just that Notre Dame is committing these penalties. It feels like they're doing it in big spots or just really inopportune moments. And needless to say, if they beat themselves like this against Ohio State, they're going to lose that game. They also lost some one-on-ones in pass protection, which it happens, but I felt like it was happening a little bit too much, considering the opponent in this one. And the season literally almost ended when Rocco Spindler got beat, and it led to Sam Hartman getting twisted up. I don't know how it looked in the stadium, but on the broadcast, the way he turned and his arms went up, it looked really bad. My heart stopped, honestly. Not to be dramatic, but as soon as I saw him go down, I put my head in my hands, and I was at my desk, and I was like, this is it. This is the season. It's really happening again. We're really losing our starting quarterback in the first few games of the season. Credit to Hartman. He got up, bounced up right away, limped to the sideline, came back in. I will say I don't think he looked his normal self for the rest of the game. He let a couple passes go, but still just happy to see him out there and getting some reps. And he did seem to be walking a little bit normally once the game ended. But still, very, very close call that happened because Rocco Spindler just kind of got dominated on a pass play, which, it happens. But if it leads to a quarterback being out for the season, it's a whole different discussion. And then there's the missed tackles. According to PFF, Notre Dame had 10 missed tackles. It honestly felt like a lot more, to be honest with you. Xavier Watts had 2. Maris Leafa had a couple. It happens. They were in on a lot of plays. But really, the one that stood out to me was Jalen Snead. He only had 1 missed tackle on the stat sheet, but I just did not think he had a very good game. He is such a good athlete, and you can see the potential when he's out there. Like, there are moments you're like, wow, that dude just moves different compared to a lot of the Notre Dame defenders. But he plays so out of control at times. Like, he missed an easy tackle for loss in the backfield, just blew right by him. And it's like, dude, keep your head up and make a play. Like, you're already in position because of your insane athletic ability. Just finish the job, make the tackle. Like I said, he only finished with 1 missed tackle, but it still felt like he had so many bad angles and just missed plays that weren't technically missed tackles. But still, I don't know if it's just me, but maybe you can relate to this as well. Missed tackles are like the most frustrating thing in the world as a fan. Maybe because I'm scarred from the Charlie Weiss days when our defense was allergic to tackling and we couldn't make a single tackle during that entire regime, and it did get better under Brian Kelly. But whenever you have a game where they're not tackling well, it's just so frustrating because if you want to be a great defense, the most simple thing you can do is be really good at tackling. I know that tackling these guys is not always easy, but still, if you're playing football at this level, you've got to be able to tackle. And Notre Dame did not tackle well, and the missed tackles were a big reason why Notre Dame's rushing defense struggled so much at times. As Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated pointed out in his weekly report card, go check it out. He's a friend of the program. He does really great work every week. Notre Dame allowed easy gains of 5, 9, 8, 6, and then 6 yards on Central Michigan's first scoring drive. They also gave up a 16-yard swing pass on the drive to the running back on the very same drive. Later in the half, they also allowed a 25-yard run that set up another rushing touchdown. And when you take sacks out of the equation, Central Michigan finished with 4.8 yards per carry for 158 total rushing yards. Now, I will say, the one thing that they had done well up to this point in the season offensively was run the ball. But a lot of that was because of Burt Emanuel Jr., who was not playing in this game. So they were using their running backs to get yards on Notre Dame. That was not something they had done previously, and they were pretty effective. Notre Dame should not be giving up easy runs to Central Michigan. They were bad run fits, and that can't happen. But again, this is something that hopefully will be cleaned up before Ohio State, because that is something that is fixable. The thing is it's on tape now. Like, everyone sees it. Ohio State is going to watch the game. They're going to see some opportunities to exploit Notre Dame on both sides of the ball. But as I mentioned in the open, sometimes these lapses happen, and it's on the coaching staff to get them figured out before the next game, and I'm confident that they will. All right, before we wrap it up here, let's go over my predictions. This is a new segment I'm doing to wrap up the recaps, because I feel like I throw out these predictions, and I don't want it to feel like I'm just throwing it out there and then I'm not ever going back to it unless I'm right. But I will start with where I was right. I did predict in the preview that Sam Hartman would finally connect with Tobias Merriweather on a deep ball, and I was vindicated early. That was pretty satisfying to see that happen right away. I also predicted a big game from Jack Kaiser. He played really well, playing a lot more without J.D. Bertrand on the field. He led the team with 10 total tackles, which is 5 more than the next player. He also added a sack as well, so really good game from Jack Kaiser. Let's go over where I was wrong. I said Notre Dame would cover the 34.5-point spread. That didn't happen. My official score prediction was 42-6, and Notre Dame won 41-17. So I was pretty close about the Notre Dame offense and what they would do in this one, but unfortunately, not with the defense. Jadarian Price also did not score a touchdown as I had predicted, and Thomas Harper did not get an interception. But, like, Thomas Harper's hit on the quarterback, I actually like that more than the interception, because interceptions happen, but hits like that, we're going to be seeing that in, like, the season highlight reel at the end of the season a lot, because it was just such a violent hit and a great play by Thomas Harper. I also discussed some things that I wanted to see. I wanted to see the offensive line make a big leap and have a get-right game. I think they made progress in the running game, but not as much in the passing game as I would have hoped, so I just kind of consider that a wash. I wanted the defensive line to be in the backfield all game. I thought it was a pretty good game overall. They didn't get the amount of sacks that I wanted, but still, they pretty much eliminated any threat of Central Michigan passing the ball, and part of that is due to the quarterback, yes. I also wanted the receivers to get back on track after NC State. I think they definitely did that. A lot of different guys got in on the action on this one. I know it was against really weak competition. Central Michigan's defensive backs are not good, but the receivers definitely needed that. They needed that confidence boost before Ohio State, and I was really happy with how they looked on Saturday. And lastly, I wanted Hartman out of the game by halftime. It didn't happen. We did get a little of peanut butter and jelly time, but not as much as I would have hoped. But again, the good thing is Sam Hartman got out of that game without an injury, and that was really the main thing going into this one. But that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. The everyday listeners of this show know we're going to have Luke Smith on the show tomorrow to go over everything we liked and didn't like from the Central Michigan game. We'll close the book on that, and we'll start to look ahead to the Ohio State game because, we can't help ourselves. It's going to be the only thing I'm going to be thinking about tonight when I get into bed because I don't really have a life. Before we head out, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And, of course, follow the show on social media. Twitter is @LockedOnIrish. Instagram is @LockedOnIrishPod. And my personal Twitter account is @TylerWojciak. I'll see you guys tomorrow.